I will never forget the night I stormed back into my parents' house, drenched to the bone, my heart pounding as if it were about to split through my chest. It was Charleston in early spring, the kind of evening where the skies had turned a slate gray and the rain came in sheets so thick you could barely see the road ahead. I had parked my old battered sedan at the edge of the long circular driveway, surrounded by gleaming black SUVs and imported cars worth more than the house I lived in. Stepping out, my shoes sank into the soaked gravel, and by the time I reached the double oak doors of my parents' Georgian-style mansion, I looked like I had been dragged through the storm itself. The house stood like a monument to their success. Oh, why? Red brick structure with tall white columns, every window glowing with warm light, and every surface manicured to perfection. From outside, I could hear the hum of violins, the low murmur of polite conversation, and the rise and fall of champagne-soaked laughter. I hesitated for half a second, clutching the strap of my worn purse, trying to summon the courage I knew I needed. Then I shoved the doors open. The marble foyer glittered beneath the crystal chandeliers, a sea of gowns, tuxedos, polished shoes, and diamonds. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the faint aroma of oysters and filet mignon from the catering staff weaving through the crowd. Heads turned almost immediately. Conversations faltered, forks froze halfway to lips, and whispers spread like wildfire. I knew what they saw. A woman with rain-matted hair, mascara streaking her cheeks, her black dress clinging to her body. But I didn't care. My daughter's face was all I could see. Emma. My sweet, fragile Emma. 6 years old, with hazel eyes too big for her little face, and a smile that could break open the clouds on the darkest day. She was lying in a hospital bed at MUSC Children's Hospital, her tiny chest rising and falling with the steady beep of monitors. The doctors had been clear. Without immediate surgery, her heart would fail. Insurance had covered part of it, but the remaining bill was staggering, $125,000. I had sold everything I could, even my engagement ring, the one relic of a marriage that had crumbled under pressure. I had borrowed, begged, and bled myself dry financially. There was nothing left. Nothing except this, my last desperate attempt to save my child. Vanessa. My mother's voice cut through the silence. Eleanor Carter glided toward me, pearls glistening at her throat, her navy silk gown falling in perfect folds. Her beauty was sharp, practiced, and cold. Guests stepped aside as though she were royalty, parting the crowd. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and as she drew closer, I saw the flicker of irritation beneath her mask. My father followed behind her. Richard Carter was the man whose empire of luxury real estate development stretched across South Carolina and beyond. His silver beard was trimmed to perfection, his posture rigid, his very presence commanding obedience. I could feel the weight of his gaze, disappointed, judgmental, final. And then there was Blake, my younger brother, standing smugly with a champagne glass in hand. The golden boy, the heir. Tonight's celebration was for him, for his engagement to a woman whose family was wealthy enough to merge their fortunes with ours. I didn't waste time. My voice cracked as I blurted, "I need your help. Emma's surgery, it's critical. The doctors say we don't have time. Please, I've tried everything else." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw Blake's fiancé clutch his arm, whispering something that made him smirk. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's fingers grazed my elbow, a polished gesture meant to guide me away from the stairs, but her grip was like a vice. "Vanessa, not now," she hissed, her lips barely moving. "We have 200 guests. Do you want to ruin Blake's night?" Tears blurred my vision. "This isn't about Blake. This is about Emma. She's your granddaughter. She's dying." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of hesitation in my father's eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. His voice was low, measured, and devastating. "You made your choices when you married that man. When you left this house. Don't bring your failures here. Blake's future comes first." My heart dropped. His future? My voice rose, trembling with desperation. "You've spent nearly $500,000 on this wedding." $500,000? And you won't lift a finger to save your granddaughter? The silence that followed was suffocating. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding my eyes, others watching with morbid fascination. I caught sight of a woman I had once called an aunt shaking her head in pity, as if I were some tragic story to whisper about over cocktails. My mother's lips curved into something that was almost a smile, but crueler. Vanessa, you always had a flair for drama. Don't do this. Not here. I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened as though invisible hands were choking me. I had expected coldness, yes, but some part of me, a foolish, aching part, had still hoped they would come through. That was when it truly mattered. When their granddaughter's life hung in the balance, they would show compassion. But there was nothing. Only polished cruelty and pride. I looked at Blake then. His smirk had faded into annoyance, as if I were a pesky interruption to his spotlight. He raised his glass in mock sympathy. Maybe you should learn to make better choices, sis. That was the final blow. Humiliation seared through me, hotter than the tears on my cheeks. My legs shook, but I forced myself to stand taller. Around me, the chandeliers glittered, the music swelled again, and the party continued as if nothing had happened. My pain, my plea, my daughter's life. It was nothing more than a footnote to their celebration. Without another word, I turned. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I strode toward the doors, every step echoing in my ears. I felt the weight of their stares on my back, but I didn't look back, not once. The rain greeted me like an old companion, soaking through me again as I stumbled down the steps. In that moment, as the mansion's golden glow faded behind me, I swore something to myself. I would never beg them again. Not for money, not for love, not for recognition. They had chosen their empire, their pride, their glittering image over my child's life, and I would choose Emma. Always. I climbed back into my car, hands trembling, as I gripped the steering wheel. The storm outside raged, but inside, something shifted. My heart was still shattered, but beneath the wreckage, a new fire sparked. Rage, determination, and the faintest outline of resolve. If they would not save my daughter, then I would. Somehow, some way, I would find another path. And as the rain blurred the windshield, I whispered aloud to myself, "This is not the end. This is only the beginning." I drove through the storm toward Savannah, the highway a dark ribbon swallowed by rain, my wipers fighting a losing battle. I kept seeing Emma's face in the brief flashes of oncoming headlights, cheeks pale against her pillow, eyes trying to be brave for me. I called Michael from a gas station just past Hardyville, hands shaking as I held the phone. He answered on the first ring and did not ask for details. He only said, "Come to my parents' house, the porch light is on." Their place sat on a quiet street lined with pecan trees and mailboxes that leaned a little toward the road, as if bowing. The house itself was small, white clapboard with green shutters and a deep front porch that had known 1,000 summer nights. Paint had flaked from the railings. One of the steps sank a little when you put weight on it. The garden was more hope than plan, a patch of soil with a few stubborn marigolds. It looked nothing like my parents' Georgian palace in Charleston, and I loved it at first sight because there was nothing to prove here. Margaret opened the door before I could knock. She wore a cotton dress and an apron dusted with flour. She pulled me into the kind of hug that dissolves your defenses, whether you want it to or not. Her chin pressed into my wet hair, and she smelled faintly of cinnamon and laundry soap. Robert appeared behind her, tall, stooped a little at the shoulders, his reading glasses tucked into the neck of his sweater. The house was warm and smelled of roasted chicken and coffee. A low lamp lit the living room, which held a faded blue sofa, a crocheted afghan, and a shelf of framed photographs that seemed to chart the history of a family one candid at a time. I told them everything. I told them about the chandeliers and the music and the way my mother's fingers had tightened around my elbow as if she could keep me from speaking by sheer force of etiquette. I told them about the bill. $125,000. After insurance, plus the hospital's demand for a deposit before the surgical team would book an operating room in Atlanta. I told them I had sold anything worth selling and that there was nothing left. I expected questions. I expected a long quiet with the kind of worry that calculates what cannot be done. Robert did not ask a single question. He stood, pressed an hand to my shoulder, and walked down the short hall to their bedroom. The door clicked shut. Margaret guided me to the sofa and put a mug of coffee in my hands. She sat beside me so close our knees touched, and she did not fill the air with words. She rubbed small circles between my shoulder blades, and every so often she said, "We are here," the three simplest words in the language when you need a lifeline. Robert returned with a thick envelope, the kind that makes a sound when you set it down. He placed it on the coffee table and looked me steadily in the eye. "This is our retirement savings," he said. "We were going to buy a little place in Florida and fish for red drum until our hands smelled like the sea. Your girl goes first. The cottage can wait." I opened the flap with clumsy fingers. Stacks of cashier's checks. A summary page clipped to the front with numbers I could not take in. $150,000. I felt the room tilt. My instinct was to shove it back and say, "No, I cannot. This is too much. This is your future." But Margaret caught both my hands in hers and said gently, "A future means nothing if we let fear win today." Michael came through the door then, hair dripping, breathless from the drive across town. He knelt in front of me, kissed my wet cheeks, and rested his forehead against mine. "We are going to Atlanta," he said. "Tonight, if we have to." I nodded because there was nothing left to say. We moved like a small, determined army. Robert spread the hospital papers on the dining table under the light that buzzed faintly, and I called the cardiothoracic coordinator in Atlanta on speaker. The woman on the line had a voice that could fold your panic into a neat square. She found Emma's file from Charleston, confirmed the diagnosis, and talked us through the steps. A deposit would confirm the surgical time for Tuesday morning. Preoperative tests would begin as soon as we arrived at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. She asked if we had a preference for a hotel, or if we needed recommendations for family housing. Margaret was already packing a bag with toiletries and a stack of clean towels. She mouthed, "You are staying with us in the room, no hotel," as if the decision had been made by the laws of gravity. I signed a promissory note to make myself feel like I was not simply taking. Robert folded it and put it in a desk drawer without looking at it. "We will argue about payback when Emma is running in the yard," he said. "Tonight we focus on the next right thing." We left Savannah before dawn, the storm finally breaking into a low mist that silvered the interstate. Michael drove with both hands on the wheel. Margaret sat in the back seat beside a cooler filled with sandwiches and fruit, as if food could be a shield. Robert rode up front and handled the calls to the bank, then the hospital, then my insurance case manager, who sounded startled and relieved to hear that funds were secured. The sun lifted slowly over the flat line of pines. Atlanta rose ahead of us in glass and steel. I pressed my palm against the window and whispered a prayer I barely remembered learning as a child, one sentence repeated until the words lost shape. "Please." The hospital air was sharp and clean. We went straight to admissions. I slid the envelope across the counter. The clerk counted and stamped and printed, her movements smooth with practice. She gave me a wristband and a file folder with Emma's name on it. The hallway floors shone, like water. The waiting room hummed with televisions, vending machines, and the soft murmur of families hanging on to hope. I thought of my parents' ballroom and felt strange gratitude that this place existed. A cathedral of fluorescent lights and competence, built for the rituals that mattered. When I reached Emma's room, she smiled with the little bite of bravery that had always broken me in two. Her nurse had braided her hair and tied it with a pink ribbon. The monitors ticked like patient clocks. I crawled into bed beside her, careful of the lines and the leads, and told her a story about a stubborn little heron who did not give up until the wind shifted in her favor. Margaret set a tiny ceramic lamb on the tray, a keepsake she had tucked into her purse. Robert stood at the window and looked out at the city as if guarding the horizon. The surgeon came that evening, a woman with calm eyes and a voice that made you believe in steady hands. She drew diagrams on a pad and explained the plan. Risks, benefits, timelines. She did not rush. She let me ask the same question 3 different ways. When she finished, she pressed my shoulder and said, "Your daughter is strong, and we have done this many times. I signed the consent forms with a pen that slipped a little in my sweaty grip. Night in the hospital folds upon itself. Machines sigh. Footsteps soften. Lights dim. Michael stretched out on the narrow couch and held my hand across the gap. Margaret sat in the corner chair and knitted without looking at her needles. Robert read aloud from a book about the marshes of the Low Country, and somehow the sentences about Spartina grass and tidewater steadied the air. I did not sleep, not really. I drifted in and out of a place where time could not pass fast enough. They wheeled Emma to surgery just before sunrise. I walked beside the gurney until the line on the floor told me I could go no farther. She reached up, touched my chin with her small fingers, and whispered, "Back soon, Mom." I kissed her forehead and nodded as if belief were an action you could practice into truth. The hours in the waiting room stretched like wire. Every clock ticked louder than the last. The coffee was burned, and it tasted like courage when I forced it down. Families came and went. Volunteers offered blankets and kind questions. Michael sat with his elbows on his knees, head bowed, a posture that looked like prayer, whether or not words were used. Margaret crocheted a row, then pulled it out, then started again. Robert walked short circuits around the vending machines, as if movement could bargain with fate. A nurse with kind eyes came out at the first hour mark to say, "She is doing well." At the third hour, the surgeon appeared still in her cap and shoe covers. She pulled down her mask and smiled, and the room filled with oxygen for the first time that day. "It went exactly as planned," she said. "We are closing. She is strong." Sank into my chair, then stood again, then hugged Margaret so tightly we both lost our breath. Michael put his forehead to mine and laughed a soft, astonished sound. Robert pressed a hand to his chest and stared out the window at nothing, the way a man does when he knows tears will win if he blinks. We saw Emma in recovery when they let us. Her cheeks were pink again. The monitors still sang their thin, mechanical song, but now it sounded like a kind of music I could love. I held her hand and told her that the heron had found a warm current and was already thinking about the next journey. She squeezed my finger, then slept again. That night, we took turns on the little couch. Margaret insisted that I shower, then put a knitted blanket over my shoulders when I returned. Robert taped the receipt copies into a folder and wrote dates. In the margins, a ledger of what it had cost and what it had given us. Michael ordered soup from the cafeteria and made me eat 4 spoonfuls before he would let me talk again. We were, in our way, a small camp around a fire. Just before midnight, I walked down to the family lounge and stood at the window that looked out over the city. The glass held my reflection, pale and tired, and steadied by something new. I thought of Charleston and all its glitter. I thought of the way my mother had smoothed the air around us like a sheet pulled tight over a bed, determined to hide the living thing beneath. I thought of my father's voice, cool as marble. Then I thought of this quiet room, this stitched-together family, this simple house in Savannah that held far more wealth than any ballroom chandelier. I pulled out my notebook and wrote 3 lines. I will repay Robert and Margaret every dollar with interest. I will rebuild a life that cannot be bought or broken. I will make a home where my child learns that a real family is a verb. When I went back to Emma's room, Margaret lifted her head from the chair and smiled without speaking. Michael shifted on the couch and made space for me to sit. Robert closed his book and set it upright like a sentinel. I leaned my head against the wall and listened to the soft rise and fall of my daughter's breath. By morning, I knew this chapter would not end with revenge. It would end with a beginning. The years that followed Emma's surgery were some of the hardest of my life. Relief had come with a price. Medical bills, loans, and the unshakable knowledge that my parents had turned their backs on me when I needed them most. I left Atlanta with Emma resting safely in the back seat, but as we drove back to Savannah, I felt the weight of the future pressing against my chest. I had nothing left. No savings, no job that paid more than survival, and no family fortune to fall back on. Just debt, determination, and a little girl whose life was worth every sacrifice I would ever make. At first, survival became my only measure of success. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at a small cafe in downtown Savannah, pouring coffee and smiling at tourists, and evenings cleaning offices in a corporate park just off the highway. By the time I returned home, Emma was asleep, often tucked in. By Margaret, with a story read aloud, and a glass of warm milk by her bedside. There were nights I sat in the dark of our modest rental, staring at bills spread across the table, tears threatening to drown me. But then I would hear Emma stir, whispering, in her sleep, and I would remind myself, everything I did for her. It was Michael who first suggested I lean into my talent. "You have an eye, Vanessa," he told me one evening as we walked along the riverfront, Emma skipping ahead of us with an ice cream cone. "You see beauty where no one else does. You've always rearranged rooms until they made sense. Why not make that your living?" Interior design had always been a passion, something I practiced quietly. I used to help friends decorate their apartments, or I'd spend nights sketching room layouts in the margins of old notebooks. But I'd never dared to think of it as a career. Still, Michael's words lit something inside me. I started small. I took on a project for one of the cafe's regulars, a townhouse owner who wanted her living room updated. I worked on it every free moment I had, choosing fabric, painting the walls, rearranging furniture until the space felt alive. When it was finished, she cried with joy. She pressed $200 into my hand and told me I had changed the way she felt about her home. That moment became the spark I needed. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. A neighbor asked for help redecorating a nursery. A local realtor hired me to stage a property that had been sitting unsold. Then, a small boutique hotel downtown asked me to consult on their lobby. Each job paid better than the last, and each one gave me something money couldn't buy: confidence. I realized I had not only the skill but the grit to make this into something real. Within 3 years, I was no longer serving coffee or mopping office floors. I was working full-time as a designer, managing projects in Savannah and traveling to Atlanta for consultations. Emma, always my little shadow, would sit beside me, sketching her own designs with crayons while I drafted proposals. She loved visiting the sites with me, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail, pointing at empty walls and saying, "Mom, what about blue here?" She became my silent partner, my reminder that this wasn't just about money, it was about building a life for us both. By the 5th year, I took a leap that terrified and thrilled me. I launched my own company, Vanessa Carter Designs. We started in a rented office above a bakery, the smell of bread drifting through the floorboards, and just 3 employees who believed in me more than I believed in myself. Together, we poured everything into every project. I wasn't just creating spaces. I was creating trust, weaving care into the walls of every home, every hotel, every historic building we touched. By the time Emma turned 12, our lives had transformed. My firm was thriving, with projects stretching from Georgia to North Carolina. That year, we landed the biggest contract of my career, $3.5 million to redesign a historic estate in Virginia. The estate had once hosted presidents and European dignitaries, and now I was entrusted with restoring its grandeur. When I stood in the massive ballroom, sunlight streaming through tall windows, I thought of that other ballroom years ago, the Thigh, one where I had been humiliated under the glow of chandeliers. This time I stood on my terms. The money changed everything. For the first time, I didn't worry about whether bills would be paid. Emma had everything she needed: school supplies, clothes that fit, even the chance to take art classes after school. Michael and I bought a modest craftsman-style home in Savannah, painted blue with white trim. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours. Every corner held love: family dinners around a sturdy oak table, laughter spilling into the backyard, Emma's drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator. Our home became a gathering place. Robert and Margaret visited often, their love filling every space. Friends and employees became part of our extended family, celebrating milestones together, supporting one another in hard times. It was a circle of warmth and loyalty, the opposite of the cold marble halls I had grown up in. And then, like whispers carried on the wind, news of my parents reached me. At first it was small, a lawsuit here, a delayed development there. But soon the cracks widened. My father's real estate empire, once untouchable, began to crumble under debt and failed investments. Blake's flashy ventures collapsed one by one, his poor decisions catching up with him. I read about their troubles in the papers the same way the world once read about Blake's glamorous wedding. The mansion in Charleston, once the stage for their opulence, had been mortgaged and remortgaged until foreclosure loomed. The luxury cars were sold off, the staff let go, and the grand parties ceased. My mother, who once floated across rooms like a queen, was now seen shopping at discount stores, her pearls replaced with cheap imitations. My father, the man who once looked at me as if I were a failure, was rumored to be negotiating with creditors, just to keep his name afloat. When I heard these things, I didn't feel the triumph I once imagined I would. Years ago, in the depths of my humiliation, I thought revenge would be sweet, that one day I would see them beg, and it would be my turn to smirk. But now, with Emma thriving and my company growing, I realized I didn't need their downfall to validate my worth. My success was already its revenge. The life I had built, full of love, sacrifice, and resilience, was proof enough that I had risen from the ashes of their rejection. One evening, as I sat in our living room surrounded by Emma's laughter and the hum of conversation, I thought back to the girl who had once burst into a mansion begging for help. That girl had been broken, desperate, and lost. But the woman I had become was unrecognizable from her. I had built something stronger than money could buy: trust, love, a chosen family, and a career I could call my own. As I sipped wine from a simple glass and listened to Emma share her day's adventures, I realized something profound. My parents had always measured wealth in dollars, estates, and appearances. But I had discovered a different kind of wealth, one they could never understand. And though their empire collapsed, mine, built on resilience, sacrifice, and love, was only just beginning. The afternoon heat pressed against the windows, the kind of Savannah summer that makes even the cicadas sound tired. I was arranging peonies in a glass vase on the dining table when I heard the knock. Not a frantic pounding, not the careless rap of a delivery driver, but 3 measured taps that sounded like old habits and etiquette surviving long after the money was gone. My palms went cold. Even before I opened the door, I knew. They stood on the porch that Michael and I painted sky blue the spring we bought this house. My mother, Eleanor, wore a simple navy dress and flats that had lost their shine. Her pearls were gone. My father, Richard, held his hat in both hands, the way Southern men do when they have come to ask for something. The years had turned the commanding line of his shoulders into a bend. His voice cracked on my name. "Vanessa, we need help." The words hung between us, heavy and weightless at the same time. For a heartbeat, I saw the ballroom again, crystal lights, my wet hair clinging to my cheeks, the way my mother had smoothed, the air as if my plea were a wrinkle to be ironed, the way my father had measured my daughter's life against a party budget and found us both lacking. I could have let the screen door click shut. I could have done it without guilt. "Come in," I said. They stepped into the cool of our hallway, the one with Emma's watercolor of a marsh framed beside the front closet. The smell of lemon oil and bread drifted from the kitchen. On the console table, a photo showed Emma at 12 on the day she cut the ribbon at our office expansion, her smile wide and free. My mother's eyes flickered toward it, then away. I led them to the living room. It is not a grand room, but it is honest. A craftsman's sofa in oatmeal linen, built-in shelves with books and handmade pottery. A wool rug that carries the faintest memory of Christmas pine. There is no room for spectacle here. I poured iced tea and set the glasses on coasters. My father did not touch his. He cleared his throat and began with details, as if facts could make the request less personal. The Charleston mansion was gone, first to a second mortgage, then to a third, finally to the bank. Blake's ventures had collapsed, one after another. The investors were gone, the friends had evaporated, and the glossy magazines that had loved them in better days had moved on to newer people with fresher champagne. My parents were renting a room from a cousin on the outskirts of Mount Pleasant, and the cousin wanted his space back by the end of the month. They had bills, prescription, refills, and a car with a transmission light they had been ignoring. Their faces carried the look of people who have stood in a grocery aisle doing math with their eyes. "I do not expect forgiveness," my father said finally. He held my gaze and for once did not try to outstare me. "I know what we did. I know what we did not do." My mother's hands were folded in her lap, fingers laced tightly, knuckles white. "We were wrong," she said. Not a speech, not a performance, just the bare sentence. It landed, small and startling. I thought of the ledger Robert kept during Emma's hospital days, the one where he taped receipts and wrote dates in the margins like small prayers. I thought of the envelope on our banker's desk when I signed, the documents that made Vanessa Carter designs real, the day my hands steadied over my courage. I thought of every night at the dining table with a calculator and a stack of bills, the way we pressed life forward one choice at a time. I had built a world where my child's laughter was the loudest sound. I would not open that world to the old harm. "I will help you survive," I said. "I will not bring you back into my life." I let the sentence sit. There is a temptation to soften the edges, to pad the boundary with apology, but clarity is the kindest language when trust is gone. My father nodded once, as if he had expected nothing more. My mother blinked hard and looked down at her folded hands. Here is what I offered. I told them I would cover the deposit and the first 3 months of rent on a small apartment in Charleston, close to a bus line and a grocery store. I would pay the overdue utility bills and purchase a basic phone plan, the kind that allows a person to make doctor's appointments and call a pharmacy without counting minutes. I would set aside a grocery budget for 12 weeks, $200 a week on a card they could use at Food Lion or Harris Teeter. I would not extend it beyond that timeline. I would not entertain upgrades. No cash is handed across the table. Everything documented. Every transfer direct. I quoted numbers because numbers keep emotion from muddying the truth. $4,000 for the deposit and the first month. $2,700 for the second and third. $900 for utilities and arrears. $800 for prescriptions. $2,400 for groceries across the 12 weeks. A total of $11,800 paid directly to the people who needed paying. I could do it. I could do it without flinching. It was less than some coffee tables I had purchased for clients. It was more mercy than I had received. It was enough. My father listened without interruption. My mother lifted her eyes once, something like pride and shame wrestling there. "We will take what you offer," she said. Her voice was small. The woman who could command a ballroom was gone. A human being remained. "I will also call a property manager I trust," I said. "There is a 1-bedroom on James Island that tends to open at the end of the month. It is simple. It is clean. The landlord is decent." I took a breath. "You will not visit here without an invitation. You will not attempt to reach Emma outside of a letter that I will screen first. If you send a letter, you will keep it to 1 page. You will not write about the past in a way that assigns blame to anyone but yourselves." My mother flinched. My father accepted the terms with a strange kind of relief. The relief of a man who understands the price of a thing and is grateful it can be counted. We spent an hour on logistics. I called the property manager. As luck or grace would have it, the 1-bedroom on James Island would be vacant in 2 weeks. I reserved it with my card. I asked for the draft lease to be sent to my office. I scheduled the utility reconnection. I entered the groceries as a recurring weekly order for pickup at a store on Folly Road. I wrote a separate check to my accountant to cover a month of her time, because bureaucracy can drown people who have spent their lives paying others to swim for them. When it was done, I set the folder on the coffee table. My mother stared at it as if it might open its hinge and bite. My father looked at the peonies in the vase, pink, white, a scent like clean sheets, and time made gentle. He spoke without meeting my eyes. "I saw you in the paper," he said. "The Virginia estate, $3.5 million. Your smile looked like your grandmother's." He cleared his throat. "You did what I never taught you to do. You built something that does not need me." "I did not do it alone," I said, and I thought of Margaret knitting by hospital light, of Robert reading about Spartina grass while monitors ticked, of Michael's hand covering mine in every waiting room where fear has ever sat down. Saying their names felt like the truest worship I know. My mother stood. For a second, her hand hovered in the air as if she might reach for mine. She lowered it. "Thank you," she said. The words were unadorned. Then she added, softer, I'm sorry." I did not tell her it was all right. It was not. I did not tell her I forgave her. That would have been a lie spoken to make the room more comfortable. I nodded once, a small acknowledgement that the truth had been spoken aloud at last. I walked them to the door. On the porch, the heat had thickened into a shimmer. My father put his hat back on. My mother adjusted the strap of her purse. They looked smaller than I remembered. I realized that power has a way of making people seem larger, and that when it leaves, it takes the shadows with it. After they were gone, I stood in the quiet hall and listened to my house. The hum of the refrigerator. The faint tick of the hallway. Clock. Emma's laugh rose from the kitchen, where she and Margaret were experimenting with a new cookie recipe, the kind that leaves flour on noses and counters. Michael came to me and touched my wrist, a question without words. I told him what I had promised. He nodded and kissed my temple. Good, he said. Enough. That evening, we ate on the back porch. Robert said grace in the simple way he always does, thanking God for bread, for breath, for whatever the day had given and whatever it had taken away. Emma recited a new joke from school and then insisted we rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. The air smelled like basil from the planter, and heat ached off the fence in soft waves. I felt the complicated ache lift, not all at once, but enough that I could breathe without tasting old marble. The next 2 weeks passed in a practical rhythm. I had a truck deliver a clean secondhand sofa, a small pine table, 2 chairs, a mattress that did not sag, and a set of dishes with a pattern my mother would never have chosen in the world she used to inhabit. Blue stripes, cheerful and plain. I did not go to the apartment on move-in day. A courier carried the keys. The property manager sent photos when the lease was signed. My accountant emailed a checklist my parents could follow, line by line, to keep the lights on and the balance in the black. The grocery card worked as intended, and after the 4th pickup, the totals began to show the kind of careful choices people make when they are learning humility by doing. A week after they moved in, a letter arrived. 1 page, neat handwriting, no perfume. My mother wrote that the apartment was quiet and clean, that the bus stop was shaded in the mornings, and that she had found a small church where the choir sang the old hymns. She did not ask to visit. She wrote Emma's name once, and only to say that she hoped the school year was beginning kindly. I read it at the kitchen counter and filed it in a folder marked Letters. Later that day, I wrote back 2 paragraphs and included a list of community resources in Charleston that help with job placement for seniors and discounted prescriptions. I kept the tone steady. I used the words, "We are all doing our best." When the 3 months ended, I sent a final note. I reminded them that the assistance had an end date. I wished them steadiness. I enclosed a grocery card with $50, a grace note, not a loophole. I pressed the envelope closed and felt a quiet click inside myself that sounded like a door that had once been jammed finally closing on its hinges. That night, I stood in the yard and watched Emma chase fireflies. Michael wrapped an arm around my waist. Inside, Margaret hummed while she rinsed dishes, and Robert argued with a baseball game on the radio in the soft, good way of men who have made peace with the outcome either way. The moon pushed up over the pecan tree, pale and sure. My greatest triumph was not that I turned my parents away. It was that I built a life they could not touch. A home where love is a practice, not a performance. A table where sacrifice is honored. A business that pays people well and fills old rooms with new light. I had wanted justice for a long time. What I found, finally, was something quieter and more lasting. I found closure. Emma ran to me with fireflies cupped in her hands, their light blinking softly between her fingers. "Make a wish," she said. I did not wish for revenge or amnesia. I wished for this, again and again, for as many years as we are given. Then I opened my hands and let the light go.